wavering from it. I haven't wavered from it since I left the newspaper business, where I was here in Chattanooga at the Times Free Press, an editor on the copy desk. I made the business writers look good. That was my job, to design pages, write headlines, decide what stories to play up, which ones to play down. Of course, we always make the most of our local stories. That's what the job is, and it's kind of obvious point to make. But make the most of your local, and because local, right, is far more important than national or global. A small shop opening on ML King is worth more type and more prestige on the page than a half $1 trillion merger of two drug giants, let's just say. So that's how lococentrism works. It is a natural part of the human being to understand that if it's near and proximate, it really matters more than big things affecting maybe more people and affecting more of culture occurring far away. David Toulis. And I argue that we should love our neighbors and buy local. It's the slogan. It's the slogan, and it's not from me. It's not trademarked, and you may use it anytime you want. We are live on Facebook, the Great Censor at Nuke Radio, and also on YouTube. David Toulis. Near is better than far, small than big, simple than complex, and personal is better than corporate. You can like us if you want, and physical than abstract. David Toulis. Now, I'm a Christian man, and I go to church on Sunday. I missed going to church a couple Sundays ago, and I just couldn't get my mother, 94, to go along with me. So it was getting late, and so I said, "I'm sorry, you're just going to have to go without us." And I stayed home, kind of minding her and trying to find something on television to watch. She doesn't have cable, so it was hard slogging to find something faithful and fruitful. But that is what I was looking for, something that was faithful preaching for us to consider. And I've been doing some reading on my own. I thought, well, I'm going to just go through the book of Deuteronomy just in one giant swag, if I could, over the course of a week. Just read several chapters a day. On, I think, Saturday, I may have read 8 or 9 chapters in that book of the law, and I'm doing that just to kind of get a perspective. I'm moving rapidly, as it were, through the rules and the arguments of Moses regarding God's people. I thought that, well, I can have something different than just studying something, right, or reading about something. And I'm asking the question to you, my listener: Is it possible that there are things in the scriptures that are valuable today? Are there points of equity? For example, the whole idea of justice is in the scripture is called lex talionis, and it comes from a famous phrase repeated as the summation of justice. And the way it's presented, it sounds kind of harsh, but it really isn't. And it's the whole eye for eye, tooth for tooth, limb for limb, stripe for stripe, burn for burn, wound for wound. There's a word that describes that kind of structure of concept, but that is what justice is. So, in other words, if I do something to you that's a burn, well, then the justice would require that I receive from your hand effectively the same thing, a burn. Okay, the burn of the same length, duration, and depth. If I lose my eye in something that you've done, and my eye is forfeit, then in law I have a claim to your eye. So if that's my claim against you, the offender, have an interest before the judge to save your eye. So the question now is, well, how much are you willing to buy your eye for? That's the question, because strictly speaking, since you were careless and took my eye from me, I have a right to your eye. So the negotiation in court is over your price, your bid on the eye. If I accept the bid, then you keep your eye and pay me the compensation. If I reject the bid, well, I think I then maybe have to. I'm not sure how this worked out in practice in the old Hebrew Republic, but I would guess I'd have to take your eye from you, and then we would be even. So that is the idea. But notice how in the end each party is satisfied. You have a wrong done, either intentionally or unintentionally, an accident or perhaps a crime when there's intent. and there is a restoration. So in the end, the offender is made right. The offended party is satisfied, and the quarrel is finished. Right, the quarrel, the dispute is settled. That's how Chancery Court got its foundings, I think, in about the 1300s in Great Britain. The king was to settle disputes, and he wanted advice of godly men, so he had bishops or chancellors in the church to listen to disputes, to bring arguments and angry hostilities over property or some injuries to kneel, right, to heal. And that's what the chancellor did. So we have judges in Chattanooga in Chancery Court called chancellors because they inherit their heirs of that great office. So what in Deuteronomy could be taught just quickly? What in Deuteronomy could be taught? Well, I was just looking through some of the passages that I'd read, and I thought, well, what are some of the ones that for someone who's not a Christian to ask about of his Christian friend, right? You're not a Christian. Let's just say for a moment, what in the Bible that your friend reads, right? He says he reads his Bible and he believes in the God who wrote it. Well, what about that? Where are things that he can draw from? For example, in the 16th chapter, you shall appoint judges and officers in all your gates, which the Lord your God gives you according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with just judgment. You shall not pervert justice. You shall not show partiality nor take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous. That's in verses 18 and 19. You shall follow what is altogether just, that you may live and inherit the land the Lord your God is giving you. So those promises about the land, of course, are now given to the church, to God's people. What about in the next chapter? Well, there's a discussion near the end of the passage on kings, and why would you want to have a king? Well, in the chapter before, we hear about God ordaining justice. Well, that's not through government in its executive form or its legislative form. It's government from the judicial form. The Bible, Christians, I think, generally don't realize this. The Bible doesn't envision executive branches or legislative branches at all. It envisions simply the civil magistrate, the wielder of the sword for justice, as just being a judge. That's all he is a judge. There is no executive branch. There is no executive at all. Why? Why is that? Well, because society itself has the executive function down in the family, right? In the family and in the tribe, there is the executive function. In our day, that would be in your business, in your connections, in your associations, and in your family. The head of the family. That's where executive functions are made by moms and dads, right? Moms and dads decide over the children to execute a certain plan or policy, or for vacation or lessons or farming or gardening or repair. It's all done by the family. So these decisions the executive function is in the family, and it's private. It's not part of the king's rule. But where do Christians tell you that God's people have been warned against kings? And in that chapter, it says, when you come to the land which the Lord your God is giving you, and possess it and dwell in it, and say, and here's what the Israelites were saying: I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. Of course, the Lord God said, don't do that. And Samuel warned, later Samuel would warn them against naming a king, which the Israelites demanded. You shall surely set a king over you, God says, whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your brethren you shall set as king over you. You may not set a foreigner over you who is not your brother. And there, the question is not so much the blood of the person, but the allegiance to God. Foreigners were not necessarily people of different blood or language. They were those who had an alien god. But he shall not multiply horses for himself. Think about police cruisers, tanks, battleships, flamethrowers, rocket launchers, and of late our space army. He shall not multiply horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, which is to say slavery, to multiply horses. For the Lord has said to you, you shall not return that way again. Neither shall you multiply wives for himself. Think of all the philanderers we had in office. Kennedy was a philanderer. Johnson was a philanderer. I think they all have been philanderers. Obama, a philanderer as well. And of course, the man in office now is in that category. And so multiply wives, but he's not necessarily troubling himself to marry them, simply to use them, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he greatly multiply silver and gold for himself. And then the other part of this law for the king is that he's supposed to read the law. He is supposed to read the law all the time. He has his own copy of it, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God and to be careful to observe all the words of this law and these statutes. Well, that's important. And I'd say, well, the king today, the president today, the governor, the mayor, they should be reading statute. They should read God's law, A, and then B, they should read the statute, because the statute in our time in Tennessee is the Tennessee Code annotated. And I've provided very useful help on that, by the way, through the Notice Project. That's to say, Transportation Administrative Notice, so that they might be just, so that they might end a long-standing injustice, which no one has, I think people in Chattanooga have not understood it to be unjust and oppressive. And I am, as a prophetic person in the press, right? The press is a prophetic function. I am appointing them to consider what the Tennessee law says about the free movement of people. Those and just by the way, go to Nuganomics.com today and see my essay on. I don't want to bring this up too much. I don't want to wear out my welcome, but the story today is about the Roger Taney opinion in Dred Scott versus Sanford. That is to say, 1856. The opinion that made slavery legal in the United States. And I think it's important to consider just briefly what the problem is that Taney was dealing with. Taney, of course, made sure that in the end slavery won. But the reason he didn't want Connecticut, he didn't want to allow Connecticut to have free slaves, is that if they were free in one state, then in I think the state from which Dred Scott came, then there would be problems when these people moved to other states, right? Think of a free slave in Connecticut wants to go to Tennessee. Well, boy, and he'd be treated the same as a white man. Well, the problem that he deals with is, well, we can't have black people moving around. We can't have them moving freely on the road. And he says there's also a provision by which any Negro, Indian, or mulatto servant who is found, now here's how he describes them, wandering out of the town or place to which he belonged without a written pass, such as therein described, was made liable to be seized by anyone and taken before the next authority to be examined and delivered up to his master, who is required to pay the charge which had accrued thereby. And he goes on to say, and a subsequent section of the same law provided that if any free Negro shall travel without such pass and shall be stopped, seized, or taken up, he shall pay all charges arising thereby. And he goes on to say, this is on page 417, it would give a person of the Negro race who were recognized as citizens in any one state of the Union the right, okay, here's the problem for him now, right? The right to enter every other state whenever they pleased, singly or in companies, oh my, without pass or passport, and without obstruction. This, again, is intolerable. Without obstruction, to sojourn there as long as they pleased, to go where they pleased, at every hour of the day or night, without molestation. We're hearing here from Roger Taney, who wrote the Dred Scott versus Sanford decision, approving of slavery and maintaining the institution of slavery, unless they committed some violation of law for which a white man would be punished, and it would give and it would give him the full liberty. Right? If you're free to travel, guess what other liberties are implied? And this is what Roger Taney could not accept. The slaver judge, right? The slaver, I think he was Chief Justice, could not accept the fact that black people would be free to move about. Because if they were free to move about, guess what? They would have at their disposal other rights. And here he gives them, and he complains about them being used by black people. It would give them the full, he says, the full liberty of speech in public and in private upon all subjects upon which its own citizens might speak, to hold public meetings upon political affairs, and to keep and carry arms wherever they went. So in other words, if you have a right to travel, these other rights are implied as being exercised by that person who can enter any other state wherever he pleased, singly, right? Singly or in companies. Now, do you see why I'm concerned about this whole travel issue? And I understand you want to hear the general news, right? Here on the David Tula Show. And you want me not to be stuck on this one question, but don't forget this. You if you're a Caucasian, you think, well, here's this David Tula. He's this leftist, right? He's this leftist former newspaper editor. But I'm not a leftist, okay? I am a classical liberal. And what that means is that I'm a Christian first and a libertarian second, which means it's in the same vein as Friedrich Bastiat and other Alexis de Tocqueville. They were 18th, 19th century classical liberals. And in our day, you would find people like von Mises, you would find Gary North, and R.J. Rushdoony, people like that. Those are called Christian Reconstructionists. They are all classical liberals. I'm one of them. Okay, I'm one of those. And the number is 800-8949, 800-8949. So I want you to understand why I'm concerned about Black people. It's not because Black people are, I'm not obsessing with Black people like as some Black people obsess about themselves, okay? My concern is that if we can help free them first, then we other people, Hispanic and Caucasian and others, we will benefit too. But and I'm trying to reverse something here, okay? If we have a people who are enslaved, we will be enslaved too. So if there's going to be a liberation of any kind in any context, it has to be first of the people who are enslaved the most and have the greatest charge and cost to them of that enslavement. And that is the abuse of the transportation statute. And because it's in traffic stops where Black people are most commonly shot down. People of color are shot down on the street more than anywhere else. And that's often in the context of traffic. Think of Philando Castile, murdered by a cop whom a jury cleared, murdered, just in public, in open. His girlfriend making a Facebook Live video moments after the bullets entered his body, and he was slumped over, gagging, and his eyes rolling in his head. And she was talking to the children in the back seat about what the cop had done, and not using any foul language. Just amazing. All your rights depend on free movement, the liberty of speech, because speech is communication, but also movement is called communication. If I'm going to go and talk with someone, I'm going to communicate with that person by being there in person. So movement, free movement, is part of that, and we have forgotten these things. And my concern is, my concern is what you have to say too. 800-8949-800. 8949. David Toulis. I do want to hear from you. Let me solve your problem. If you have a problem, I am here to help you discuss it. And sometimes just you're discussing your problem with me is a way to see the door out, right? To see the solution. And because I try to ask the best questions that I can and patiently listen to people, just patiently listen to them. This is David Toulis. And these rights, whether keeping and bearing arms, holding public meetings, liberty of speech, if we don't fight first for the people most oppressed, this is a holdover from slavery, right? The abusive use of the statute today is a holdover from the slave days, and it's illegal. It's simply illegal. And you, my white listener, you, my rich, wealthy man in the Mercedes, you are as enslaved as these poor Black people are who are harassed by the police here in Chattanooga. You are a victim too, but I want you to think about them empathically. I want you to think about your poor neighbors in these rundown neighborhoods with not a lot of capital, a disadvantage in many ways, a disadvantage. And I want you to think about them first, because if you think about them first, you will at some point obtain the freedom, the liberty, the relief that I propose come first in that part of the world, in that part of Chattanooga and Hamilton County, and faraway places. If you, my listener, are in a faraway place, I do invite you to realize that nothing I say is trademarked or copyrighted, and you can copy all you want, especially our wonderful moniker here on the David Toulis Show, love your neighbor and buy local. That is local-centric, and we want this reform to start here. Why? Because we're jealous of God's favor. we are jealous of God's favor. And so we're not wanting anything to be done in Nashville or in Washington. We want it to be done here. And we're going to start one cop at a time. That's what my notice does. It works on the individual officer to understand the limits of his authority under Title 55. It sounds complicated, but it's really pretty simple. And I want us to find relief and prosperity, especially for people like Sheila Jackson, especially for people like her. Now, we're going to talk with Lauren Turner. She runs a stylish shop and over it on floor 2, an Airbnb. David Toulis, who's ready.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news now.
Chattanooga police say a man shot in the shoulder while sitting in his car early Sunday morning.